As a driving force in the luxury home fragrance industry since 1992, Laura Slatkin's reputation is unparalleled. A true tastemaker and pioneer, she brings to Nest, New York, her classical style, discerning taste, and unique creativity. Laura changed the fragrance world when she applied her learnings from home fragrance to fine fragrance, shifting the mindset of having a single signature scent to the more modern approach of incorporating a wardrobe of fragrances into one scent aesthetic. Laura created Next New York in response to an unaddressed need in the fragrance market. Outside the world of fragrance, Laura is committed to various causes, most notably autism, as her son David is afflicted with this life-altering disorder. In 2003, along with her husband Harry and closest colleagues, she co-founded Next for Autism, an organization that transforms the national landscape of services for people with autism by strategically designing, launching, and supporting innovative programs. So can you tell us a little bit about David and his nonverbal autism?
Yes. So autism is a spectrum, and unfortunately, Davy sits on sort of the wrong end of the spectrum, if you will. He's not high functioning. He's very, very impaired, severely impaired by autism. So he's never said a single word. He has no verbal language at all. Cognitively, he's very, very weak. And he has aggressive behaviors both to himself and to others. And he's kind of very hyperactive. He's always on the go.
Mm-hmm.
He can rack an obscene amount of steps per day if you let him. He loves to walk, and he doesn't really ever sit down. He's learning to sit down, which is one of his recent accomplishments. And trend we're seeing that he's doing really well now. But he's very hyperactive, so he's very, very impaired by autism.
Yeah. So when did you notice that David or there was something wrong with David?
Yeah. Well, because David has a twin sister, Allie, it was really easy to observe them reaching, or in David's case, not reaching the appropriate milestones.
Mm-hmm.
Some he would pass with her, but then there came a point where she continued to develop and he stopped.
Mm-hmm.
And it was most apparent in his gait. When you're little, you're running down and, your gait is really wide. And then as you get older, your gait narrows and you walk more gracefully. And so Allie began to walk gracefully, and David's gait stayed wide and got wider. And he would run back and forth in the hallway, laughing and giggling and back and forth and back and forth. And that was my first clue.
Right. Okay. And then you obviously got him diagnosed. So what emotions did you and your husband, and Allie, but Allie was a baby at that point. How did this obviously impact your family? I mean, clearly you were devastated, and it still impacts your family on a, regular basis because it's hard, but.
So we had Davy evaluated, and then I went on a business trip, and we waited for, the results. And I got home from this business trip at like 11 o'clock at night, and I walked into the house, and Harry said, you didn't want to tell me when I was traveling. So he said, we got the results back, and it's PDD-NOS, pervasive developmental disorder, not otherwise specified.
Right.
And so of course I went right on the computer, and the more I read, the more I saw the word autism. So I went into the bedroom because I was in the library. I said, I keep seeing the word autism.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I know. I said, does he have autism? And, we both just didn't know, but it was clearly apparent that PDD-NOS was a nice way of saying autism. And because he was diagnosed at such a young age, he was diagnosed at 15 months, 17 months, they would never give him a label of autism because who knows where it's going to go from there. He's too young to be given a diagnosis of autism. So it was pervasive developmental disorder, not otherwise specified. So I went to bed that night, and the next day, not knowing, and back then in the early 90s, autism wasn't part of the nation's vocabulary. Nobody had autism. I didn't know anyone that had a child with autism. So I knew nothing about it. So I went to Hunter College bookstore and I said, do you have any books on autism? And he said, oh, we have tons of books on autism. And I stacked up like 12 books, bought them, went back, got into bed and just read for 2 days. And I read about so much of what could possibly go wrong, like horrible things, like them smearing their feces on the wall and aggressive behaviors and destroying property and hurting others themselves. And I kept reading all of the worst things that could possibly happen to my beautiful, stunning, I mean, he was gorgeous.
He is gorgeous.
Gorgeous. But as a baby, he was a knockout. And one night I just broke down and cried myself to sleep. And I'm not a crier. I just don't, it's not easy for me to cry. And I got up in the morning and my husband said to me, Laura, crying is not going to help David. Crying is not going to help Allie.
Right.
It's not going to help our marriage. It's not going to help our family. Roll up your sleeves and do something about it.
Right.
So that was really how I began on my journey with that, those great words of wisdom from my wonderful husband.
Yeah, no, of course. And okay, so now getting back a little bit to David, so you obviously mentioned that he's cognitively, he has low cognitive functioning as well as he's nonverbal. So I know he lives elsewhere in a home. But so in order, for instance, his day-to-day life, and I'm sure they do a variety of activities, and obviously Daniel or somebody else also looks after him and so forth. But how do you guys, I guess, quote unquote, like navigate like activities for him? Do you just like put him down? And I don't mean it in that way, but you know what I'm saying? Like, say, all right, today we're going to do art. Like over the years, I'm sure you've somehow figured out what he likes and what he doesn't like by certain nonverbal cues or gestures.
Well, communicating has always been a really difficult thing for David. And because, he's cognitively weak, like most kids, if they're nonverbal, they'll have a communication device that they type words on. And
right.
There's a multitude of ways. Even sign language would be another alternative for him. Again, because he's cognitively weak, it's very hard to teach him sign language. He confuses them all, right? This was eat and this was drink and this was walk, and he just would scroll through them all till you gave him what he wanted. So he couldn't discriminate and differentiate between the different signs and understand this means I'm going to get that cause and effect. All of that is difficult for him. So, and we've had the best educators on him on the Eastern Seaboard for the past 20 years, but the recent program that he's in, he's doing a lot better in terms of communication because of the consistency of care. Right. So now he's, living with a professional family. We created Next for Neighbors, a model program. And in this model program, the consistency of care, the people that take care of David are a small group of people, and they're all aligned on exactly what demands they're going to make of him to communicate. So he has a little picture exchange system with pictures of a guy walking, toilet bowl, of food. And if he wants something, he has to use one of those pictures. But because the consistency is they're so focused and consistent, they're really making demands on him every single second of the day to use his pictures to express what he wants. And hopefully, he will engage less in inappropriate behavior and aggressive behaviors that's problematic. So we're on this road, and I think we're on a good path.
No, you're definitely on a good path. So I guess when David was diagnosed, you mentioned this a little bit, but there was very limited research and information on the field of, autism. So you'd mentioned reading about a ton of books and, obviously doctors and this and that. But what would you say was the most, what was the
what was the one thing about autism that was lacking 21 years ago that now, obviously also with Next for Autism, which we'll talk about, and just what the research is today, has improved upon?
Well, I think, when David was diagnosed in the 90s, autism was really not a spectrum disorder. It turned into a spectrum disorder in 1994. But back then, it was really pervasive developmental disorder. And it was really generalized. And now today, it's very, now today, there's a range of symptoms that identify autism, and it's a spectrum disorder. So, but back then, fortunately, in terms of services, when David was diagnosed, fortunately, we were trying to figure out what was wrong with David, because originally, when we went to the pediatrician, she said, oh, boys develop slower than girls, don't worry about, that typical story. But we kept pushing to get his ears tested, and and I once went to an ear doctor when we were having his hearing tested, and she took one look at David, wrote a phone number on a piece of paper, handed it to me, and said, call this number and have your son evaluated. And she did it in such a way that was so impactful. I was petrified, thinking, oh my God, I have to call this number. And I did. And that number was early intervention. So I was one of the lucky ones.
Right.
Really just fell into early intervention very quickly. Mm-hmm. And before I knew it, he was diagnosed with pervasive developmental disorder. He was, in the system, receiving 40 hours of therapy a week. People were coming and going. And I fell right into the community. I was plugged into the community. And from there, I just blossomed. So I was one of the fortunate things. But I think today, pediatricians, learn the early signs. People are aware, that, the work that's been done over the past 20 years to raise awareness for autism and put that word in our vocabulary, nation's vocabulary. All the work that's been done in research and advocacy and education. So much has happened over the past 20 years. It's unbelievable. Everybody knows what autism is today.
Yeah. So what do you think, because there are, unfortunately, a lot of misconceptions. I mean, clearly from my own medical background and just being involved in the medical world, I know a lot, but not everyone does. What is the one misconception, could you say, that people often have of what autism is?
It goes back to that Rain Man sort of story where everyone thinks that autism means they're super bright and super smart and have splinter skills that, and they excel in particular areas, and they don't understand what the Davids of the world look like. And I worry about that people really don't understand the other end of the spectrum and the implications on that individual's life and the family's life. So I think it's glorified in many ways, and that is problematic, and is something that we really need to change and have been focused on changing.
Right. No, for sure. I feel like, unfortunately, there's a lot of misconceptions on a lot of different things. But I think primarily there's a lot of misconceptions on autism and also Asperger's and what they all mean. And I think there's less knowledge, like you said, on, the autism that David has versus, I'm just gonna pull this name out since you'll know who she is, Temple Grandin, for instance. It's just so so you started with your husband, Next for Autism, which is an organization that implements programs and helps with research and really advancing and providing great care for those in the autism spectrum disorder. So can you tell us a little bit more about Next for Autism?
Sure.
And what was the mission, or what was your inspiration, I should say, to start it?
So it was interesting because when David was diagnosed with autism, we went to go see this doctor, and she said, it's important that we don't know where this is going. He's very young, but you should research all the schools for individuals with autism and get him signed up, because they're very difficult to get into, the good ones. And then she gave me a list of schools to look at. And oddly enough, they were all in New Jersey.
Mhm.
And I had to get in my car, drive over a bridge to find a state-of-the-art superior school for kids with autism. And we just thought that was crazy. And that's what was the impetus for us to start Next for Autism, because we wanted to open a school. And that was an interesting process because, we were grappling with, and then we formed a board and everything, but we were grappling with, should it be a private school? Should it be a public school? What is the structure? What's the vehicle? And one day I typed a letter to Joel Klein, our then school chancellor of New York City. And I said that, I had a child with autism. We wanted to start a school for children with autism, and we need your help. And back then we were really using fax machines. So I faxed him the letter, and like within an hour, I got a letter faxed back to me saying, we have over 5,000 kids with autism in the New York City public school system. We need your help.
Wow.
And ultimately, we started a charter school for children with autism. But it was then that we really learned the power of partnerships, right? Working with the public school system, rather than it be a private school where we would charge, kids 6 figures, because that's what it ends up costing. Because here's the thing, Harry and I really weren't worried about people like us, because we were able to pick up the phone and get what we need to, get where we need to be. But we were really thinking, what about that single mom in Harlem, 3 kids working 3 jobs, 1 with autism? How is she surviving? What is she going to do? If she had a kid like David, how could she possibly support that child?
Right.
There weren't enough hours in the day for her to research and do the work that we successfully did. So we worked very closely with Joel Klein, who was a really terrific advocate for our work, and Bloomberg was mayor at the time, and we opened up a charter school in Harlem, and admission is by lottery, and the kids attend the school. That doesn't cost them anything. And we recruited one of the finest directors we could find. And, because it's a charter school that's based on the principles of applied behavioral analysis, which is the preferred methodology for educating individuals with autism. So we opened up that charter school, and took a lot of work. It took 3 years of working with the state and the city, because it had never been done before. And it was a bumpy road, but we survived and we got it done. And we were really, really proud of that. And then from there, we began to realize, again, the power of partnerships and who we could really work with to advance our efforts. So once we had the charter school opened, it then became the question, well, if we're going to impact the New York City public school system, because we wanted our charter school to be a model for the New York City public school system, how do we raise the bar in autism education within the public walls? And I was sitting at my desk one day, and I got a phone call from Jennifer Rabb, the president of Hunter College. And she asked if I would come to her offices to have a conversation, and I did. And she said, we're really interested in autism, and I know you have an autism organization. We don't want to duplicate your efforts. And so the more I started to listen to her talk, the more I was thinking about the lack of educators in the New York City school system, qualified educators. And we ended up partnering with Hunter College out of that conversation and funding them to create a behavioral certification program at Hunter College. And over 300 teachers have passed through that system.
Wow.
And that was our way of, again, this private-public partnership with an institution that had the infrastructure, right, to do the work. And we had the desire, and just working together, we could get it done. And then we realized that through partnerships, we could get where we needed to be much faster. And that became our model going forward. So our next endeavor was to, when Davey was diagnosed with autism, it was funny, but I sent him to Yale to have a further evaluation and to get the information I needed, because none of the universities or hospitals in New York City were really diving into this topic and providing services. And I found that shocking because, I always say that New York City is the most important city in the world. Well, now I get a lot of slack for that. So I say one of the most important. It's a very sophisticated city, and for it to not have a state-of-the-art autism clinical program, which was very disappointing. So we did a lot of research, and I worked closely with the NIH, determining, which universities were in New York, hospitals, who should we work with. And we chose Columbia University, Cornell, and New York Presbyterian Hospital because they're so deep and rich in the neurosciences. And we called up the president of the hospital at the time, secured a meeting, said we wanted to create a clinical program, develop a center for autism that would provide clinical services, assess, diagnose, and treat individuals with autism across their lifespan. He said, no, we're not doing it. Because, there's no money in autism. It's not like you're going into the hospital and that's where they make their money, in hospital stays, and it's not profitable. And he just couldn't afford to build this thing for us. So I went home and I thought, what if we built the building? What if we funded the deficit? What if we partnered with them? And I went back with a proposal and we laid it out, and they said, yes, let's get going, let's do it. So we built Center for Autism and the Developing Brain in concert with New York Presbyterian Hospital, Cornell, and Columbia University. We recruited a world-class, renowned autism clinician, Dr. Catherine Lord, who's really the grande dame of autism clinical services. And we started the program, and we had to renovate a building, break ground, build the building, recruit the staff. But we got it started. And, again, it's about choosing institutions that we want to partner with. And that was our story. And it became our sort of mantra. 1 + 1 = 3.
Of course. And now you're also doing more programs. So the program that House Employment and so forth, so the program that David's in.
Yeah.
Part of you guys. You've expanded, and it's terrific. Something that is special, well, from what I've seen and from my point of view, is that in conjunction with Nest Fragrance, you developed recently a scent called Apple Blossom, which was the inspiration was after David. Can you tell us a little bit more about this scent and what it means to you and your family, and the research that this candle or fragrance, I should say, that people buy goes to?
Yeah. So I am in the fragrance business and have been for 28 years. And Nest Fragrances, Nest New York is the company that I founded in 2008. And so anyway, so when David moved into this new model program, Next for Neighbors, that we're really, really excited about. It's a really fantastic program that is really the future for adults with autism. But I went up there one day and David was having a difficult time. And I was trying to think, like, how can I spend the day with him so that we, are doing something enjoyable and we can be together. And I thought, it was just at the end of the apple picking season, right, and it was in the middle of the week. And I said, maybe I can take him to an apple picking orchard. And we went there and it was empty. No one was there. Right. And we held the whole orchard to ourselves. And I would point to the apple and he would pick it and he would put it in the bag and we go skipping through the orchard. And it was just an amazing moment. He was giggling and laughing and looking at me and looking at the apples and looking at the bag. And we just had like the best time holding hands. And it was just a terrific day of bonding, really doing something fun with him. And he was participating. So anyway, I created this fragrance Apple Blossom, and a portion of the proceeds benefits Next for Autism, specifically geared towards this adult program.
amazing. I've seen the video many times. I've seen it. Well, I saw it before when I was first introduced to you in terms of who you were, and then I've seen it doing my research and so forth. And it's an adorable video, and it's very, very sweet.
Thank you.
So as a mom, as an entrepreneur, I don't even know what else I can call you aside from all the work you do with autism. You're a woman of all trades, and that's an understatement. I should say you're remarkable. But as a mom, and I guess you can talk also about Harry, my husband, and Allie is his twin sister. What has David taught you guys in terms of autism, but then also, just about life, because life is not a straight line, as you guys clearly have witnessed and know firsthand.
Yeah. So what has David taught me? So, certainly, we were always philanthropic before the kids were born, but fundraising and being philanthropic became personal once he was diagnosed with autism. And having gone through starting this organization and doing some of the things that we did, like I knew nothing about the education system. We're in the business of making candles.
Right.
I knew nothing about the NIH research, clinical programs, universities, how they're organized, how they operate. For me to get in front of a team of clinicians or scientists or executives of a hospital and encourage them to do a program and partner with me was very, very intimidating, because again, I didn't know anything about research or how hospitals and universities operated, and it was daunting to me. But I didn't care because I wanted to get this thing done. I knew in my heart that the community needed it. I knew in my heart I wanted to build programs and make New York City stronger for those that were affected by autism. All I had was my heart and my passion. And I really didn't care. That it taught me that, not to be so intimidated, to just, if you want to do something, don't worry that you don't know. It's okay, because you're going to bring something to the table. They know. They're the experts, and combined with your efforts, something beautiful can happen. It really broadened my horizon. This whole thing broadened my horizons and made me a stronger person, and taught me that anything's possible. You can accomplish anything if you put your mind to it. Absolutely. And you surround yourself by smart people.
Of course. Yeah. I mean, you guys have surrounded yourself with smart people left and right, regardless of whether it has to do with David or not. And I mean, smart people are at the forefront of everything, and it's important. So lastly, what is one piece of advice you would give to other parents or caregivers that have children who have autism?
Well, I think it's really important for families to create an environment for their children in which they can blossom. Mm-hmm. And the wonderful thing about, when David was diagnosed, with autism, and after like 5 years of intense therapy, they said he was a candidate for residential placement. And when he became really super aggressive, we couldn't keep him at home. So we did place him in a residential program. And I always lived with enormous guilt, knowing that he was there, really because the IEPs that they formed, to take care of David look great on paper. They weren't being executed.
Right.
David really wasn't learning daily living skills and engaging in the community and learning this or that was on his IEP. It was there, but the implementation of those things, I felt, was never. It was lacking. Mm-hmm. And now that I see my son in Next for Neighbors, where every single second of the day is a teaching moment to teach him how to do his wash, how to go grocery shopping, how to make pizza, how to mow the lawn. Like every single moment of his day is a teaching moment. And I can see my son blossoming and growing. Like we went to the supermarket the other day and we stood in front of the vegetables and I said, David, which vegetable do you want? And I pointed and he pointed to the carrots and I said, okay, get the carrots and put them in the shopping cart. And he got the carrots and he dropped them in the cart and he giggled. He giggled because he felt really proud of himself that he had the opportunity to pick which vegetable and put it in the cart. Like this wasn't happening for a long time in his life. Mm-hmm. And this new program has taught me that with the right supports and the right focus and the right program and the consistency of care and the focus, that he can learn and to do things, the simplest things, like putting carrots in a supermarket basket. And we can build self-esteem and, whether it's, doing whatever throughout the day. For the first time in my life, I feel so happy that my son is now living up to his fullest potential. And at Next for Autism, that's what we want for this adult population. There's over 5.5 million adults with autism, and there is a dearth of services. And the services that do exist, it's more like a warehousing kind of thing. These kids are warehoused. They worry about their health, they worry about their safety, but they don't really focus on taking these individuals, these adults with autism, and having them live as independently as possible, as productively as possible, and as joyful as possible. So that's our future at Next for Autism, to really focus on adults with autism and how do we focus on employment? How do we focus on living, recreation, all of these things, health and well-being, all of these things connecting themselves to the community, like taking David to the pizza parlor so many times that pizza parlor man knows his name, right. Like really engaging them in the community. Someone once said to me, and she was so right. She said, if one out of 54 individuals are diagnosed with autism, we should be seeing them in our supermarkets, in our movie theaters, in the park, and in their workplace. And, that's kind of an exciting mission for us at Next for Autism. So that's what we're really excited about. So my advice is to really keep pushing till you can get your kid into a situation where you have built the appropriate scaffolds around him so that they become their personal best, and always be thinking we're always thinking what's next for autism, but what's next for my kid? What could be next for them?
Right. It's great advice. Well, I could talk to you all day.
I could talk all day too.
Have dinner with you. Oh my goodness. I'd love to. It'd be my honor. It's so much fun. Well, thank you so much for doing this with me.